Ever wondered why some people always seem one step ahead? Today on Mind Code Vault, we're revealing the 10 best clear thinking secrets to outsmart everyone around you. Stick around, because these tips will completely change the way you make decisions and see the world. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe so you never miss life-changing insights. Let's unlock your mind's full potential starting right now. There is a moment, and most people can recall it with painful clarity, when they realize that the wrong decision has already been made. Not in a boardroom, not in some high-stakes negotiation, but quietly, in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day, when the emotion was running just a little too hot, or the pressure was just a little too loud, or the comfort of a familiar pattern felt just a little too safe to resist. The damage, in those moments, doesn't announce itself. It compounds, silently, over months, over years, over decades, until one day you look at your career, your relationships, your finances, your sense of self, and you feel the weight of 1,000 small decisions that were never really decisions at all. They were reactions, defaults, the automated outputs of a mind that was never truly in control. This is the conversation that most self-help books are afraid to have with you. They want to hand you a motivational slogan, a morning routine, a list of habits to track. But Shane Parrish, founder of Farnham Street, one of the most widely read thinking blogs in the world, read by CEOs, military strategists, and some of the sharpest minds in Silicon Valley, goes somewhere far more uncomfortable. He tells you the truth, that most of your thinking isn't thinking at all. That the single greatest obstacle standing between you and the life you want is not your circumstances, not your competitors, not the economy, and not your past. It is the quality of the decisions you make when no one is forcing you to be careful, when the moment feels routine, when your brain, running on biological autopilot, quietly steers the ship while your conscious mind shares from the passenger seat, believing it's in charge. What you are about to hear is not a summary. It is an immersion. 10 secrets, not tricks, not hacks, not productivity theater, but genuine, battle-tested principles of clear thinking that will permanently alter the way you process the world around you. Apply even 2 or 3 of these consistently, and the people around you will begin to notice something different about you. The way you pause before you respond. The way you ask the question that cuts through all the noise. The way you seem to make fewer mistakes than everyone else, not because you are smarter, but because you have learned what most people never do: how to think clearly when it matters most. Let's begin. The first secret is one that sounds almost insultingly simple, until you sit with it long enough to feel just how radical it really is. It is this: most people are not thinking, they are reacting. And the difference between those two things is the difference between the life you have and the life you want. Shane Parrish calls this the problem of default behaviors. Human beings, like all biological organisms, are wired for efficiency. The brain burns an enormous amount of energy, and so it has evolved a suite of automatic responses, what psychologists call heuristics, that allow us to navigate most of life without expending real cognitive effort. This is not a flaw. In the ancestral environments, the ability to respond fast, to react to threats without deliberation, kept you alive. The problem is that we are no longer living in the ancestral environment. We are living in a world of complex financial systems, nuanced professional relationships, long-horizon career decisions, and AI-driven economies that are shifting the landscape beneath our feet. And yet the brain, ancient, energetic, and serving, pattern-hungry, is still running its old software. Think about the last time you sent an email in anger and regretted it within the hour. Think about the last time you made a financial decision, because everyone around you seemed to be making the same one. Think about the last time you stayed silent in a meeting when you had something valuable to say, because something in the room, some social pressure, some fear of judgment, made silence feel safer than clarity. None of those were thinking. They were biological programs executing on cue. The first secret, then, is to become a student of your own defaults. Not to judge them, not to shame yourself for having them, but to see them clearly and label them honestly. Parrish identifies 4 primary default behaviors. The emotion default, which causes you to react based on how you feel rather than what is true. The ego default, which causes you to prioritize protecting your self-image over finding the right answer. The social default, which causes you to conform to the expectations of the people around you rather than exercising independent judgment. And the inertia default, which causes you to maintain the status quo simply because change requires effort. These 4 defaults, operating beneath conscious awareness, are responsible for the vast majority of poor decisions that human beings make. Not stupidity, not malice, defaults. The moment you can say, in the heat of a situation, "I am currently in my emotion default," something extraordinary happens. The reaction slows. The space between stimulus and response, what Viktor Frankl famously called the last of our human freedoms, opens up, and in that space, actual thinking becomes possible. The second secret builds directly on the first, and it is this: the most important battles in your life are not the ones that feel important. They are the ones that feel small. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive insight in Parish's entire framework, and it is the one that most people dismiss too quickly because it demands a kind of vigilance that is genuinely uncomfortable. We have been conditioned to believe that good thinking matters most in high-stakes situations, the big presentation, the major negotiation, the pivotal life choice, and so we reserve our best cognitive effort for those moments. But by the time a situation feels high stakes, your options have already been dramatically narrowed. The decision space has been compressed by weeks, months, or years of small, seemingly inconsequential choices that were made on autopilot. Parish calls these ordinary moments the hidden battleground. The real game is not played in the dramatic climax. It is played in the mundane middle, in how you respond to the slightly irritating email from a colleague, in whether you revisit the assumption you made last quarter, in how carefully you listen when someone is telling you something you don't want to hear. These small moments, repeated over time, create the conditions that determine the range of options available to you when the stakes are genuinely high. Consider a freelancer navigating the rapidly shifting AI economy. The moment that feels like it matters, the lost contract, the platform disruption. The realization that a tool has automated something they used to charge for is not actually where the strategic battle is fought. That visible crisis is the downstream consequence of dozens of small moments in which the freelancer either did or did not update their worldview, invest in their skills, or reconsider their positioning. The person who maintained the best options in the moment of crisis is almost always the person who is most rigorously honest with themselves in the ordinary moments before it. The practical application here is disciplined self-examination in low-stakes moments. Not journaling as performance, not meditation as trend, but a genuine recurring habit of asking yourself, in the quiet between the noise, where am I currently on autopilot? What assumption am I operating on that I haven't examined in the last 6 months? What is the thing I keep almost thinking but stopping myself from following all the way to its conclusion? These questions asked consistently in ordinary moments are the difference between a person who builds a life of genuine and a person who spends their life reacting to consequences they could have seen coming. The third secret is about one of the most powerful, least discussed concepts in all of decision-making science, the idea of position. Your position, meaning the resources, relationships, reputation, and options you have accumulated, determines the quality of your future decisions more than the quality of those future decisions themselves. Let that land for a moment. Most people think of good decision-making as a skill you apply at the moment of choice, and it is. But Parish makes the compelling case that the single most leveraged investment you can make in your decision-making is not to get better at choosing in the moment, but to get better at the slow, patient work of building a position that gives you good choices to make in the first place. A person with deep financial reserves, a strong professional network, and a reputation for integrity will consistently make better decisions than an equally intelligent person who lacks those things, not because they are smarter, but because their position affords them options. They can afford to say no. They can afford to wait. They can afford to be honest. This insight has profound implications for how you should be thinking about your work, your money, and your relationships right now. If you are making decisions from a position of scarcity, financial pressure, professional isolation, or a reputation that is either thin or damaged, then you are playing the game on hard mode, and no amount of decision-making technique will fully compensate for the structural disadvantage your position creates. The right time to build a strong position is when you don't immediately need it. In the context of the modern AI-driven economy, this principle is more urgent than it has ever been. The professionals who will thrive over the next decade are not necessarily the ones who are most technically skilled at this particular moment. They are the ones who are building the kind of position in their networks, their thinking, their financial buffer, their personal brand that will allow them to adapt when the landscape shifts again, and it will shift again. The question is not whether you will be disrupted. The question is whether your position, when that disruption comes, will give you options or eliminate them. The fourth secret strikes at something deeply human and deeply dangerous, the relationship between our need for certainty and our capacity for clear thinking. Here is the uncomfortable truth that most intellectually honest thinkers eventually arrive at certainty is almost always a signal of poor thinking, not good thinking. We live in a culture that rewards confidence and pernicious doubt. The person in the meeting who speaks with absolute conviction gets listened to. The person who says, "I'm not sure, but here's how I'm thinking about it," gets overlooked. And so we learn, early and thoroughly, to perform certainty, especially when we don't actually have it. But this performance has a catastrophic cost, because the moment you commit to certainty, you stop updating, you stop looking for disconfirming evidence, you stop asking the questions that might reveal that you are wrong, you stop being a thinker and start being an advocate for a conclusion. You reach before the thinking was done. Parish draws on the work of probability theory to offer a profoundly practical alternative. Think in probabilities, not certainties. Rather than asking, is this right or wrong, ask, how confident am I in this, on a scale from 0 to 100, and what would have to be true for me to update that confidence. This small reframe from binary judgment to probabilistic assessment does something remarkable to the quality of your reasoning. It keeps you open. It creates room for new information. It separates your ego from your conclusions, and it makes you dramatically better at navigating the genuine uncertainty that characterizes every important decision. A CEO deciding whether to enter a new market, a freelancer deciding whether to invest in a new skill, an investor deciding whether to allocate capital to an emerging technology. None of these decisions can be made with certainty. They can only be made with the best available reasoning about probabilities. The person who has learned to think this way does not become paralyzed by uncertainty, they become liberated by it, because they are no longer trying to be right. They are trying to be accurate. And accuracy, practiced consistently, gets you much closer to right than the performance of certainty ever does. The fifth secret is about the nature of information, and specifically about the most important question you can ask about any piece of information you receive. Not, is this true? But why is this being told to me, by this person, in this way, at this time? This is not cynicism, it is not paranoia. It is what Parrish calls incentive-aware thinking, and it is one of the most sophisticated and consistently underutilized tools in the entire arsenal of clear thinking. Every piece of information that reaches you has a source. That source has interests. Those interests shape what information gets shared, how it gets framed, what context gets included, and what gets left out. This is not a conspiracy. It is human nature, operating exactly as you would expect it to. Charlie Munger, one of the greatest investors of the 20th century and a man Parrish has written about extensively, built a significant part of his analytical framework on a single phrase: show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. If you understand what a person gains from telling you something, you understand something crucial about the reliability of what they're telling you. The financial advisor who earns a commission on the product they're recommending. The colleague who frames the project update in a way that minimizes their own contribution to the delay. The news article that presents one side of a complex story with confident finality. All of these are information arriving through a filter. The filter is not always malicious, but it is always present. The practical skill here is what might be called source mapping, a mental habit of briefly tracing any significant piece of information back to its origin and asking the incentive question before acting on it. In the modern information environment, where AI-generated content, algorithmically curated feeds, and sophisticated marketing have made the line between genuine information and interested persuasion harder to detect than ever before, this skill is not merely useful, it is survival-level important. The person who has internalized incentive-aware thinking will consistently see things that others around them cannot see, not because they have access to better information, but because they are asking better questions about the information they already have. The sixth secret addresses one of the most painful and most transformative experiences available to any serious thinker, the experience of being genuinely, completely, constructively wrong. Most people's relationship with being wrong is essentially defensive. Being wrong feels like a threat to identity, a source of shame, a signal of inadequacy. And so the vast majority of intellectual and emotional energy that people expend around incorrect beliefs is not spent correcting them, it is spent defending them, explaining them away, finding the interpretation that allows the original belief to survive. This is the ego default in full operation, and it is one of the single greatest barriers to the kind of clear thinking that produces compounding results over time. Parrish proposes a completely different orientation to being wrong, one that treats the experience not as a threat but as information, specifically the most valuable information available. Because the only way to be reliably right over time is to become exceptionally good at being wrong gracefully, at identifying your errors early, updating your beliefs honestly, and extracting the maximum possible learning from the gap between what you expected and what actually happened. This requires separating your identity from your conclusions. It requires what the best scientists, investors, and strategists in the world have learned to do. Hold your beliefs the way you hold a hypothesis, with genuine openness to refute. Jeff Bezos famously said that he wanted to be right at the end of the conversation, not necessarily right at the beginning. That orientation, prioritizing the quality of the eventual conclusion over the comfort of the initial position, is one of the hallmarks of elite-level thinking, and it is completely learnable. It begins with the simple, daily practice of asking yourself, what did I get wrong today, and what does that tell me? The seventh secret is one of the most immediately applicable, and it centers on a concept that Parrish returns to repeatedly throughout his work, the concept of the second-order consequence. Most people, most of the time, are living and deciding at the level of first-order consequences. They see the immediate, obvious result of a potential action and make their choice based on that. The person who can consistently see the second and third-order consequences of their choices, what happens after the immediate result, is operating at a fundamentally different level of strategic intelligence. Consider the professional who takes a higher-paying job for the immediate financial gain without carefully thinking through what happens next. The second-order consequences might include a more demanding schedule that reduces their capacity for skill development, a political environment that damages important professional relationships, a role that, despite the higher salary positions, them further from the opportunities that will matter most in 3 years. None of these are invisible. They are simply not immediate, and first-order thinking doesn't naturally surface them. Or consider the entrepreneur navigating a competitive market who decides to compete aggressively on price. The first-order consequence is more customers. The second-order consequence is a potential price war that erodes margins across the entire market. The third-order consequence might be the commoditization of an offering that they had previously positioned as premium. This is not speculation. It is exactly the kind of dynamic that is played out in dozens of industries. The people who saw it coming were not prophets. They were simply asking the question that first-order thinkers don't think to ask. And then what? The practical discipline here is to build and then what? Into your decision process as a genuine pause, not a formality. Before committing to any significant choice, take the decision one step further than feels necessary. Ask what the person who made this choice 5 years ago is dealing with today as a result. Ask what the market will look like if everyone in your position makes the same choice. Ask what second-order consequence you would kick yourself for not having anticipated. This habit, applied consistently, is one of the most reliable separators between ordinary thinking and strategic clarity. The eighth secret is about the hidden power of constraints, and it challenges one of the most cherished assumptions in both the productivity and entrepreneurship worlds, the idea that more options are always better. The psychological research is unambiguous, and the practical experience of the world's best decision-makers confirms it. Too many options degrade the quality of decisions. This is not primarily because of analysis paralysis, though that is real. It is because the cognitive effort required to evaluate many options is itself a form of decision fatigue that degrades every subsequent decision you make. The person who enters a decision with 3 clearly defined, well-chosen options will almost always outperform the person who enters with 15 loosely defined possibilities, not because the 3 options are better in absolute terms, but because the mind can bring its full resources to bear on a constrained choice space in a way that it simply cannot when the options are unbounded. Parrish takes this further, making the case that constraints are not just manageable, they are genuinely generative, that some of the most creative, most strategic, and most effective thinking in human history has been produced not in conditions of abundance but in conditions of limitation. The startup that cannot afford to pursue every opportunity and is forced to make a genuine bet. The writer who commits to a form, a sonnet, a haiku, and discovers that the constraint produces a depth of creative thought that open-ended freedom never would. The executive who, rather than scheduling 45 meetings to gather input, forces herself to make the call with the best available information, applied to the modern context. This principle is an antidote to the paralysis that the information age has made so pervasive when you can read 10,000 perspectives on any topic, access data from 100 different sources, and consult an AI tool that generates 20 possible approaches to any problem. The risk is not ignorance. The risk is cognitive overwhelm masquerading as thoroughness. The clear thinker's discipline is to set intentional constraints on information inputs, on options considered, on time spent in evaluation so that the mind can do what it does best when it is not drowning. See clearly, choose decisively, and act with genuine commitment. The ninth secret is one that requires a certain kind of intellectual courage, because it involves honesty about something most ambitious people actively avoid examining: the role of luck in their successes and the role of their own thinking in their failures. Human beings have a nearly universal cognitive bias, called the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to attribute our successes to our skill, judgment, and effort, and our failures to external circumstances, bad luck, or other people's interference. This bias feels protective. It sustains self-esteem, but it is, over time, one of the most expansive cognitive habits a person can maintain, because the person who cannot honestly identify how their own thinking contributed to a bad outcome is the person who will repeat that thinking, and the person who cannot honestly acknowledge the role that fortune played in a good outcome is the person who will eventually take risks that their skill does not actually justify. Parrish introduces a practice he calls the outcome audit, a disciplined retrospective process that separates 2 questions that most people conflate. Was this a good decision, and did this decision produce a good outcome? These are not the same question. A good decision is one made with the best available information, sound reasoning, and honest self-awareness, even if the outcome is bad. A bad decision can produce a good outcome by virtue of luck. Conflating these 2 things, judging the quality of your thinking by the quality of your results, is one of the most dangerous habits an intelligent person can develop, because it corrupts the feedback loop through which learning happens. The clearest thinkers in business, in investing, in strategy, the people who maintain their edge over decades rather than burning bright and fading, are almost universally distinguished by their rigorous honesty about this distinction. They celebrate their good processes, not just their good outcomes. They interrogate their good outcomes for the luck that contributed to them, and they dissect their bad outcomes for the thinking errors that made them possible. This is not self-flagellation, it is the most sophisticated form of professional development available, and it is completely free. The 10th and final secret is perhaps the most profound, and it is the one that integrates everything that has come before it into a single, unified principle. It is this: the quality of your thinking is ultimately determined not by how smart you are, but by the quality of the questions you are in the habit of asking. Intelligence is relatively fixed. The habit of asking great questions is a skill that can be cultivated indefinitely. And the gap between these two facts is where the real game is played. A highly intelligent person who habitually asks shallow questions: how do I win this argument? How do I make this opportunity look attractive? How do I explain away this failure? Will consistently be outperformed by a less naturally gifted thinker who has learned to ask deep ones. What am I missing here? What would have to be true for the opposite of my current belief to be right? What is the most important thing I am currently not thinking about? Parrish grounds this principle in the concept of mental models, the frameworks through which we interpret reality. Every mental model is essentially a question. The model of supply and demand asks, how do incentives shape behavior? The model of compounding asks, what are the long-term effects of small differences in rate? The model of inversion, one of the most powerful and least used thinking tools available, asks not how do I succeed, but how do I avoid failing? These questions, applied consistently across the domains of your life, are not just tools for better thinking. They are lenses through which entirely different realities become visible in the AI economy. This principle has acquired a new and urgent dimension. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly capable of answering the questions that human professionals have historically been paid to answer, the premium on the ability to ask better questions is growing at an exponential rate. The professional who can look at a complex situation and identify the question that everyone else has been too comfortable or too rushed or too defensive to ask. That person's value is not being eroded by AI, it is being amplified by it. Because what AI still cannot do, and may never do in the way that matters most, is bring genuine intellectual honesty, genuine curiosity, and genuine moral courage to the question of what questions should even be asked. Let us close with a reflection that is not comfortable but is necessary at this very moment. While you are listening to these words, there are decisions accumulating in your life. Not dramatic ones, not the kind that feel like decisions. They are the quiet accumulations. The conversation you are not having, the assumption you are not revisiting, the skill you have been meaning to develop, the financial buffer you have been meaning to build, the relationship, professional or personal, that you have been meaning to invest in before you need to call on it. These are the ordinary moments that will become the extraordinary constraints or extraordinary freedoms of your future self. They are where the real game is played. The cost of unclear thinking is not paid in dramatic disasters. It is paid in the slow, silent narrowing of your options, in the opportunities that pass without your noticing, in the decisions made from positions of weakness that could have been made from positions of strength. If only the patient work of clear thinking had been done in the ordinary moments before, in the version of your life, the career you might have built, the problems you might have solved, the impact you might have had that never quite materialized. Not because you lacked talent or opportunity, but because the thinking that would have revealed both was never quite clear enough, never quite honest enough, never quite disciplined enough to cut through the noise. You now have 10 secrets, not theories, not platitudes, practical, testable, immediately applicable principles for thinking more clearly, deciding more wisely, and building the kind of life that reflects the quality of deliberate thought rather than the accumulated weight of unreflected defaults. What you do with them is, of course, your choice. But choose deliberately. That is, in the end, the entire point.